Nehemiah chapter 2. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was before him, I took up the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had not been sad in his presence, and the king said to me, "Why is your face sad, seeing you are not sick? This is nothing but sadness of the heart." Then I was very much afraid. I said to the king, "Let the king live forever. Why should not my face be sad, when the city, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" Then the king said to me, "What are you requesting?" So I prayed to the God of heaven, and I said to the king, "If it pleases the king, and your servant has found favor in your sight, that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's graves, that I may rebuild it." And the king said to me, the queen sitting beside him, "How long will you be gone, and when will you return?" So it pleased the king to send me when I had given him a time. And I said to the king, "If it pleases the king, let letters be given to the governors of the province beyond the river, that they may let me pass through until I come to Judah, and a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the fortress of the temple, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall occupy." And the king granted me what I asked, for the good hand of my God was upon me. Then I came to the governors of the province beyond the river, and gave them the king's letters. Now the king has sent with me officers of the army and horsemen. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite servant heard this, it displeased them greatly that someone had come to seek the welfare of the people of Israel. So I went to Jerusalem, and was there for 3 days. Then I arose in the night, I and a few men with me, and I told no one what my God had put into my heart to do for Jerusalem. There was no animal with me but the one on which I rode. I went out by night by the valley gate to the dragon spring and to the dung gate, and I inspected the walls of Jerusalem that were broken down, and its gates that had been destroyed by fire. Then I went on to the fountain gate and to the king's pool, but there was no room for the animal that was under me to pass. Then I went up in the night by the valley and inspected the wall, and I turned back and entered by the valley gate, and so returned. And the officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, and I had not yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, and the rest who were to do the work. Then I said to them, "You see the trouble we are in, how Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned. Come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem, that we may no longer suffer derision." And I told them of the hand of my God that had been upon me for good, and also of the words that the king had spoken to me. And they said, "Let us rise up and build." So they strengthened their hands for the good work. But when Sanballat the Horonite, and Tobiah the Ammonite servant, and Geshem the Arab heard of it, they jeered at us and despised us and said, "What is this thing you are doing? Are you rebelling against the king?" Then I replied to them, "The God of heaven will make us prosper, and we his servants will arise and build. But you have no portion or right or claim in Jerusalem."
All right, Nehemiah chapter 2. If you haven't figured that out, that was the clue. We just saw the whole thing and looked at it and listened to it. Today we're going to tackle that chapter, and we're continuing our series that we started last week in Nehemiah, where we see a challenge to do hard things, where we see that the Lord calls us to do difficult things. There are just things in our life. There are individual callings. There are individual opportunities that the Lord has for you that are hard things. They're difficult things. How do we do that? How do we do that as individuals? How do we do that together as a church? How do we pursue and do that? So overall, as we look through the book of Nehemiah, we're going to see these things, and we're going to be challenged to how we can process and do these hard things. How the things that seem impossible, actually, God has called us to do. and He will strengthen us, and He will make possible. Here's the hard thing is big things in your life, they don't usually just happen, do they? It takes time. And today what we're going to look at is a lesson that we learn from Nehemiah, that it takes prayer and planning. It takes prayer and planning to do the hard things that God has called us to do. How many of you right now are in a season of transition? You're in a season of transition. You're facing a change in life. Things are changing. You're standing at a crossroads, and you are trying to figure out how to get ready for what's coming. You're trying to figure out how to move forward and to do what's next. For some of you, it may be starting a family. For some of you, you're planning weddings. Some of you are facing the question of retirement. Should I do it? When should I do it? How should I do it? But I really want to do it. Some are facing just changes of life. Krista and I are in our midlife crisis. We're at the point where our kids are all starting to get to the end of our 18 years where we're responsible for them. And we're hoping that we've trained them up to be productive humans and members of society, and we're trying to help them discover their gifts and their callings and their passion and where God would have them. It's a strange stage of life, isn't it? Everybody gave all kinds of advice when they were babies on what to do. What we've learned is at this stage in life, everybody's like, good luck. They're all different. But Krista and I, there's times that we sit together and we go, you know what? Soon it's just going to be me and you. What are we going to do? We are all often facing changes in life. I mean, you may be trying to shift your career, to shift your job. You may be trying to figure out how to make a large purchase or do something that's going to change your family. Or maybe, as we discovered last week, God has placed something on your heart, and there is a unique individual passion that you have to serve the Lord that requires some things to happen. Basically, all of us come to these places in life where there are large decisions that need to be made. There are large challenges that we can't do by ourselves. We need the Lord, and we also need to work together with others to be able to make the things happen that needs to happen to get from point A to point B. How do we do that? All right? Incredibly relevant, right? How do we do that? How do we make those shifts? How do we make those changes? Well, what we'll see today from Nehemiah chapter 2 is an example of how God works through Nehemiah to do a hard thing, how he works through that, and we see the basis of God working through Nehemiah is built upon first, Nehemiah is dedicated to prayer and planning, to both prayer and planning. Now, you might be saying, Bob, why is prayer and planning a hard thing? Like, why have you listed this as one of the challenges for us? Well, here's why. We typically are a prayer or a planner. You typically keep a prayer journal or you keep a planner or a to-do list. And our natural inclination, from what I've observed, is we naturally either resort primarily to prayer or primarily to planning. And here's the thing I've also observed. You usually marry the opposite type of person, don't you? So when something difficult comes, and I'll just give you an example. Krista and I felt that the Lord was calling us to seek out a new ministry opportunity a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. And we spent a lot of time praying about that. We both felt that the Lord was leading to that. We didn't know what was going to happen. We weren't in a situation that we were running away or things were bad. We loved the people. We loved where we were. We just felt that the Lord was leading us. Well, it was here, but we didn't know it. And so we started, and after we talked about it, I went into serious prayer. I went into a time of serious prayer. Krista made a list and started packing stuff. Like, that's the way, and I'm not saying she didn't pray. I'm just saying we tend to lean really hard towards just praying, Lord, would you let this happen? Lord, I know this needs to happen. Lord, I need you to make this happen. Or we tend to say, okay, it needs to happen. God's with it. What do I do? And we start going. What we see in Nehemiah and what truly we need to do is we need to be challenged to both pray and to plan. Because here's what can happen. The prayer, me, can often be really worked up, really emotional, really desiring for something to happen, but because the practical steps aren't being taken place, because practically you're not analyzing and assessing and finding resources and being able to plan how A goes to B, goes to C, goes to D, a lot of times for the prayer, things just don't happen. Right? And for the planner, what can happen is you can run in front of God. You can say, all right, here's this and this and this and this opportunity, and I'm just going to go and I'm going to do this, and then this will happen and this will happen. And we can tend to live in such a way that we're trying to accomplish something that we need the power of God, we need the wisdom of God, we need the hand of God, but we try to do it on our own. Does that make sense? Are you with me? And so the challenge today is that as we approach these transitions, as we approach these difficult things, as we approach questions about how to do things, how to proceed, and we need God to work on our behalf, we need to be dedicated to prayer and to planning. And that's what we see here in Nehemiah. Now, just to give you a little bit of a context to remind you, Nehemiah is a Jewish guy. He is far away from home. He is in the Persian Empire. And basically what happened is most of the Israelites were stolen from their land, and they were taken away, and now they're serving in a foreign land. They're slaves serving a foreign king. And they are not where God wants them. They're not where they want to be, but they have kind of melded into this life. It's all that they know. And last week, as we began in Nehemiah, we saw Nehemiah, this individual. He introduces himself as the cupbearer to the king. We'll look into that a little bit more here in a minute. But he receives word that Jerusalem, though individuals were sent there in 2 waves before, it still lies in ruins. It's still unable to be habitable. It's still unable to do what God has called them to do, to fill the place and succeed there. You trying to tell me to, okay. I got baseball signals going on in the back, and I'm trying to figure out if I'm bunting or I'm swinging away. Okay. So last week we looked at that. Do you remember that? The word of this came, and it hit Nehemiah all of a sudden hard. Our challenge last week was that we would see things the way God sees them. That we would see with God's eyes. We would look around our world. We would look around our situations. We would look at our own lives. And we would desire to see things the way that God sees them, that we could be moved to act and live how God would have us to do. And so that's the background for where we find ourselves today. Nehemiah has already been praying. In fact, it said, that he was praying and fasting. His heart was wrecked when he heard this news, and he went immediately to prayer. Commentators suspect maybe even 3 to 4 months that he spent in praying and fasting, that he was just overwhelmed by the fact that God's people were not able to live in God's land. And once you get that perspective and you start looking where you're at, here I am in Persia, here I am serving the king, here I am in this godless place, here I am doing these things that just really aren't important because God needs us to be in our home so that he can bless our people. You see, when your eyes are open, then everything gets reprioritized, doesn't it? And so Nehemiah has been praying. He's been fasting. But what we're going to find as we get to chapter 2 is he's also been planning. When the opportunity comes, he is ready. He is ready because his prayer has been met also with planning, with a plan of action, with seeking to see how God would answer his prayer. 3 things today, real simple. The first is this: we need to pray with purpose. We need to pray with purpose. And you'll see this again in chapter 1 and then verses 1 through 4. Nehemiah has been wrecked. He's been praying. And we learn a little bit more about Nehemiah. At the end of chapter 1, it says that he was cupbearer to the king. He was cupbearer to the king. Now, what does that mean? This was his job, and it's not a particularly great job. Because here's what's happening. The king is under constant threats. Everybody's wanting to kill him off, and he trusts no one. And one of the ways that they can kill him is by poisoning him. And so the cupbearer basically, when they bring out the drink, when they bring out the wine, the cupbearer's job is to drink it. And you know you did a good job if you die. I mean, that's all there is to it, right? If he dies or he looks sick, then the king says, get me a different cupbearer and let's open a different bottle. But with that also comes incredible trust. I mean, for the king to have that kind of trust in a slave is pretty amazing. And not only that, but the king becomes familiar with Nehemiah. There's a relationship there as dignitaries come, as he has meetings with individuals, as they eat and they drink together. Guess who's always by his side? Nehemiah. And what Nehemiah doesn't know until this point is that God has specifically placed him, God has specifically gifted him, and God has specifically called him so that he is the one with the access, the resource, the passion, the ability to do something incredible that God needs done. Isn't that amazing? Do you think that Nehemiah before this ever thought, here I am in this incredibly powerful position as a slave to do something for God? I have to imagine that he just kind of lamented where he was and why he was there. He was faithful in what he did, but God awoke in him to the uniqueness of the opportunity that he has for him. And that's what we were praying for last week. I hope you caught that. I hope you spent some time praying and asking that the Lord would open your eyes, that you spent some time assessing your own life and your own situation, and maybe there is something unique now that you feel called to do. This is how we move the ball forward, is once we realize that and we realize God has called us to it, then we begin to pray and we can begin to plan. We can begin to see how God has leveraged us uniquely as individuals with gifts, talents, callings, and opportunities to be able to do that which God has for us. And so again, he's cupbearer to the king. And it says here that he comes into the king's presence for the first time. He'd not been sad before the king. He had not, his face had not shown the internal problems that he's going through, but he walks in before the king. It says parenthetically as you move on that the king is with the queen there, and he comes in and his face is down. His face is sad. So much so that the king says, why is your face sad? Now, I don't know. Perhaps the king really likes Nehemiah and is genuinely concerned, or maybe he's just afraid that he's already sick from something that he drank. I don't know. I've never had a cupbearer and been worried about being poisoned, but either way, he recognizes it and he says, "Why is your face down?" And so here is the opportunity that Nehemiah has been waiting for. In fact, the king says, "Why is your face sad? You're not sick." This is nothing more than sadness of the heart. Nehemiah has been praying, he's been planning, he's been waiting for the right opportunity. That's the hard thing about waiting on God, isn't it? To be motivated, there's something that needs to be done, to be heartbroken and in prayer, and to begin to leverage resources and develop a plan. But at the end of the day, we still are dependent upon God's timing. We're still waiting for God to create that opportunity. And here, God very succinctly creates that opportunity. The king asks him, what's going on? Tell me what it is. And it's very interesting. Nehemiah's response is, if you're looking at your text there, "I was very afraid." Now, why would he be afraid? Why is it that he's afraid? Well, it's because what God has called him to do and what God has called him to come before the king and do is a really big ask. It's really big to go and ask the king as a slave who is the cupbearer, "Would you allow me to return to my foreign country that you rule over right now and help fortify and restore it? Not only would you allow me to return, but would you also provide me with all the resources that I need to be able to do that?" That's a big ask, isn't it? It's a really big ask. But Nehemiah is brave enough to do so. Why? Because he spent time in prayer. He has spent time in fasting. He has spent time in planning. And so because of that, he's ready to go. Verse 2, the king says, why is it that what is it that you're requesting? Interesting, look at Nehemiah's response. Before he begins to respond, after the king says, "What is it that you're asking?" he says, "I prayed." He stopped and he prayed. Why would he do that? It's not because he's unsure that God has called him to that. It's not because he's unsure of what his plan is. It's because he's dependent on God so much that he has to realize God not only needs to prepare the message, but the messenger. He's praying, I'm assuming, "Lord, allow me to be clear in my presentation. Be with me. Allow the king to understand." Let me just share with you something that I hope is in your practice, and that is there are all kinds of opportunities and times in life where you might have difficult or complicated or situations that you really fear because they could go one way or the other. And before that moment comes, would you stop and pray? Would you put this into practice? Before I make a phone call to someone, if I know there's something that we need to discuss that might be difficult, I stop and I say, "Lord, be with this. I pray for your will. I pray, Father, that you would guide. I pray that it would be well received. I pray that I could be clear and that I could listen and that they would listen so that you would be glorified." Right? There are moments where before we act, and this is what we can do. We can pray, we can be motivated, we can be ready to go. And then when the time comes, we just jump. Nehemiah here stops and he prays again. We're going to find Nehemiah even though Nehemiah is a practical, get things done dude, Nehemiah is dedicated to prayer. And met with all of his planning, all of his execution, what undergirds that is his prayer life. What allows him to be brave and courageous and effective is that first and foremost, he is a man of prayer. And if we want to see God work in our lives, we too need to remember this. We need to remember that we need to be dependent upon the Lord. As you can see, I had some work done this week. I had my second shoulder surgery. It's gone well, but it still hurts. You know, they got in there and dug around, and my arm doesn't like it. But it reminds me of how it is to be dependent. because, I came in here the first thing and I said, honey, I need you to help me tuck in my shirt because I can't do it. Being like this is a good reminder. Anytime that you're laid up and you've got to ask people to help and to do the basic things that normally you're able to do on yourself, there's a bit of a pride that kind of gets knocked with that, isn't there? That's what prayer is supposed to be like. Prayer is very much recognizing your need for God, your need for God to act, your need for God's wisdom. It's very much like being laid up like this, where you have a weakness that you cannot overcome, and to be able to move forward, to be able to do what needs to be done, you need to be strengthened, encouraged, and guided by God Himself. That's what prayer does. Prayer is a battle against our pride. And so Nehemiah begins with prayer. We need to begin with prayer. As we see and we're motivated and we're worried, we need to be a people of prayer. Let me just tell you this. The world, our culture, exists to make you afraid. It exists to make you afraid because people want your vote, they want your money, they want your attention, they want your advocacy. And one of the ways that they do that, a very effective way, is to frame things in such a way that you fear, that you don't know what to do. May we remember that when we don't know what to do, the place that we're to return to is to God Himself in prayer. May we be a people of prayer. If we want to find success in what God would have in our lives, we need to be a people of prayer. For some of you, prayer is the natural thing. For others of you, planning is the natural thing. Again, I want us to balance. We need to be people of prayer and planning. So the second point is this: plan with precision. We need to be people of prayer. We need to be a people of planning. There's two sections here where we see Nehemiah's planning and where we see how he assesses the situation so that he can be successful in executing the situation. The first is this: we need to plan that God would move. If God has laid something on your heart, you've spent time with God in prayer about it, you've received counsel from God's people, you've looked to God's word, and you know that this is something that God has gifted, God has given you the opportunity to, and God has called you to, then we need to begin to plan in such a way that those things will happen. Again, I'm the prayer, Krista's the planner. And so often, what happens is I become defeated really quick. Oh, it's just too big. And it's not because I have a low view of God. It's really just because I haven't given the amount of time that I need when I feel that God has called me to something to then say, okay, how do we put the pieces together? God, how will you lead me and resource me so that we can do those things? Nehemiah had obviously done this. If you look at those texts, we won't read them again, but the king says, okay, what do you want? Nehemiah stops and he prays, and Nehemiah is ready to go. Nehemiah he can quickly articulate the what of his plan. He says, send me to Judah, to the city of my father's graves, that I may rebuild it. He not only has the what of the plan, he has the timeline of the plan. The king says, well, how long are you going to be gone? Again, it seems as though there is a great trust and relationship between the king and Nehemiah, where he says, I don't necessarily want to lose you. What kind of time frame do you think this will take? And he was able to tell the king a time frame that was able to satisfy the question because he had thought through these things. He had planned. He knew what was going to happen. He could articulate even the details of the plan, the logistics and the resources. As you look, he goes on and he asks that the king would give him letters so that he and the people that go with him, that they may pass and do these things, that the king would give him letters, that he would basically open up the forest, the king's forest, for resources so that they could have the timber to complete the construction project. All of this he has detailed. He's ready to go. Again, why? Because prayer was met with planning. Because prayer was met with planning. His planning and his prayer undergirded his success. Nehemiah didn't just stop at prayer. And it seems real holy and real righteous sometimes just to resort to prayer and to minimize planning, to minimize execution, to minimize how things are going to go. But I want to tell you, this is my heart, that for us as a church to be effective, for us as a church to do the things that God has called us to do, for us as a church to accomplish the tasks that we said that we want to do, spiritually unto the Lord, logistically for our church and for our ministry, we have to not only be people of prayer, but we have to be people who are able to plan and able to move the ball forward. Does that make sense? Sometimes we think that's an unholy thing, but here's the deal. If we don't do it, the things that God has for us won't get done. Are you with me? Prayer alone won't move so that the kingdom of God can grow, so that God's purposes and wills, that the good works that He has prepared for you to walk in, you can actually go and walk in them. We have to have prayer and planning to be able to move forward, both of which have to be done, both of which undergird being able to be successful for the Lord. Let me just ask you this, like we could say, all right, we want our community to hear about Jesus. That's a good thing, right? We want that, amen? And we could pray about it. God, we want our community to know about Jesus. You've placed us here. You've given a church here. You've given us the gospel. Lord, we just want them to know. We want them to experience. And we could pray and we can fast about that. But if we don't ever put pencil to paper and say, okay, here's the different communities that we have. Here's individuals that live in those communities. Let's get a team and go prayer walk that community and try to invite a Bible study in that community that we can have some kind of an influence and an in. If we don't begin to put the practical things in place, the prayers don't go anywhere. Are you with me? And so this is one of the things that Nehemiah helps us to understand. Of course, prayer and planning takes time. That's the hard part. Nehemiah has the idea of the plan. He goes to the king, but he still doesn't know if this thing's going to work, does he? There's still a lot that's got to happen. And so what we see is that in his planning, he allows time and opportunity to assess the situation thoroughly. We see this as he moves on. If you look at verses 11 through 16, and again, we won't read them again, but what you see is Nehemiah, after he has the king's permission, he begins to go. He meets a little bit of resistance. We'll look at that in a minute. And then he goes into the city for 3 days, and he just observes. He goes into the city for 3 days, and he observes for himself. He realizes what he needs. He asks for wisdom. He takes notes. He writes down. He's very detailed, and this gate has this problem, and this gate has this problem. He correctly assesses the situation so that when it's time for people to join him, they're able to join him and move and do what God has called them to do. And this is where sometimes we jump the gun. We feel called to something. God begins to answer some of the prayers for it. And we often will take off before we've really given the time to assess the situation, don't we? And so here we have a good reminder. As we pray and as we plan, be careful to assess the situation. Be careful to give it the time that it needs. Be careful to talk with God's people, to look for other individuals that may have done something similar that you can learn from, to make sure to have feedback from others. I love in our committees at the church, I'll often say like this, I want feedback. It's okay to give feedback. Give it in a way that's kind and that is beneficial. But we all should realize we're not the smartest people to have it all figured out. But there's a great resource we have as a church as being a group of people who are filled with the Holy Spirit, who love Jesus, and who want to work together to accomplish the opportunities and the things that He's called us to do. And so here he begins to assess the situation, to look at it, to have a plan, which leads to the third point. And it's this. all the prayer and all the planning don't mean anything if we're not able to act with courage. If we're not able to pull the trigger and move forward. And so that's what we see here. You look at verses 17 through 20. He begins to rally the people together. He says to them, "You see the trouble we're in, how Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned. Come, let us build the wall, that we may no longer suffer derision." And I told them of the hand of my God that had been upon me for good, and the words of the king had spoken to me. And they said, "Let us rise up and build." And so they strengthened their hands towards the good work. Here's the reason why it is particularly important in something that you're going to lead a group in, that you spend adequate time in prayer and in planning. And that's this. If you don't have a God-sized vision to do a God-empowered work, nobody's going to follow you. All the time, people will come to me and say, not here so much, but in Titusville, I had this a lot. I would meet people, and they'd be like, God is calling me, one guy, God is calling me to build a homeless shelter. And it's something that we needed right there in Titusville. He's calling me to build a homeless shelter. I'm like, that's fantastic. What's the plan? He's like, I don't know. We need a home, and we need homeless people, and we need to minister to them. And I was like, that's fantastic. Come back when you have some details. Right? It's not very encouraging when you don't see that the individual has been led by God, spent time with it. But when somebody can come to you and say, God is calling us to do this, and here's how we're going to do it, and we can do it together, then all of a sudden things change, don't they? We begin to say, yes, we can do that. And so what I want you to remember and what I want you to be encouraged by is this, pray for your church, pray for your pastors. This is one of the hard callings that God gives to us, is that we would spend time in prayer and planning so that we would be able to lead you as a church, that you'd be willing to be led, that you would be inspired to be led, so that God can do good and great and awesome things through us. God has done incredible things through this church and is doing incredible things through the ministry of this church. But here's the deal. I believe God wants and can do even more. Amen? I mean, as God is continuing to bless us, and we're receiving more and more peoples with more and different callings, different resources, different opportunities. I'm excited as a pastor because that just means more opportunities that God can partner together with us, that we can go and do great things. But we have to have that vision. And I will say this, for our church, for this place here, we have an absolute vision that won't change. Our focus is on lifting up Jesus. Our focus is on showing that He is incomparably glorious to anything else, and that everybody needs to know Him, to love Him, and to follow Him. And so everything that we do, whether it's a Bible study, whether it's a youth event, whether it's preaching, everything that we do here as a church is based on this. We want to point people to Jesus. And that's what we do. We want everyone to know the gospel. That God has created you and He loves you. That you are a sinner. You have rebelled against God. And because of that, you find yourself in a bad place. We're all sinners. But God sent Jesus Christ, His Son, to come and to live and to die for us, to go to the cross that He might pay for our sin, that we might find forgiveness in Him. God has done that, and the way that you connect with that is, do you believe in that? Do you have faith in that? Have you repented of your sins and trusted in Christ? Have you seen Jesus as glorious, so much so that you would forsake everything to follow Him? And then, we want to see you grow as disciples. We want to help you discover what it means to walk with Jesus, what it means to serve Jesus, what it means to go on mission with Jesus, to get to a point. I know some of you are like, this is mind-blowing. I remember when I was young, it was mind-blowing to think that God would use me and my background and the things that I had done to ever help lead other people to Jesus. I mean, that was mind-blowing. But God is working in your life to strengthen and to develop you, that you might be one who teaches and shows and loves and disciples others to grow more like Jesus. And that's foundational for the vision of what we have as a church. That's foundational for all that we want to do and all that we want to go. You know, I hope that that's communicated as we talk about the challenges physically for our campus and the buildings and remodeling and all the things in the future. I hope that you see we're not here just to build a castle. We're here because we want the kingdom of God to be built. We want these things to be tools and resources that we can minister to families, that we can point people to Jesus, and that He can be glorified even more in us and through us, because He is worthy of all the praise and glory that we could give to Him. Here's the thing, though. As we act, we have to act with courage. My grandpa used to tell me something all the time. He would tell me, if it was easy, it'd been done already. If it was easy, it'd be done already. It's true, isn't it? The reason that things are left undone is because there is a challenge involved in doing them. And the challenge often is opposition. And here's what can happen. We can pray and we can plan, and God can begin to have favor on us, and we can get really, really excited, right? And then the first person who raises the first question, we're like, oh man, maybe this isn't worth doing. It's crazy how often that can happen, isn't it? And here's the reality, is that that kind of opposition comes. Here we're going to see as we go throughout the book of Nehemiah, these three individuals, Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem, who mock and berate. They are political emissaries of neighboring countries, and they do not want Jerusalem to be restored. They do not want the Jewish people to be in their home. They do not want the things that God has called them to do to take place. And so they're going to constantly be a pain for Nehemiah and for the people. And so they begin to kick up here, and they begin to threaten them. They begin to say, you're against the king, which in other words is, we're going to, there's charges against you. You're in derision. You can find yourself in a lot of trouble against the king if you start to do these types of things. The reality of it is this: sometimes people just don't want change. It doesn't matter what it is. This is why we have to spend time in prayer and planning and seeking the Lord, because we will meet opposition. Sometimes it's just simply, it wouldn't matter what it is, people just don't want change. Sometimes people can't see the end result of change. And so it's hard for them. They're not early adopters. My favorite is, sometimes they're the ones that at the end, they're like, this was the best idea ever. But on the front end, they just couldn't see it, right? Sometimes people don't want you to succeed for jealousy or for pride. They're upset that God's using you and not them. Sometimes people are convinced of worldly ideas and philosophies that even the clearest of God's plans they would oppose. Don't anticipate that you'll never meet resistance. Don't allow a small amount of resistance to stop you if God has called you to do something. Does that make sense? But to know that God has called you to do it, we have to first spend the time in prayer and in planning and seeking to do. And so this is what we see. Nehemiah inspires the people. Beside those who rise up and talk against them, the people are ready to go. They're the ones that rise up and say, let's do this. Let's go. Let's build. Why? How did Nehemiah get to that place? How did he get from people who are in the land, they don't really care, they can't see it any different, to rising up the nation to say, we're ready to go? He did it because first, he was called to pray, and he was called to plan, and he had the courage to act. The same is true in our lives. If we're going to do things for God, if we're going to see God move in us and through us and amongst us, in your situation, whatever it might be, let these principles be in place. I'm challenging you, pray and plan. For some of you, the praying part is the real challenge. For some of you, the planning part is the real challenge. But I hope that as you see this, we see that both are good and both are holy and both are needed. That we need to be a people before God in prayer, and we need to be a people seeking God's wisdom in planning how we might accomplish the things that God has called us to do. We need to pray for God's guidance, plan with purpose, and act with boldness. When we do that, God will give us success. He'll allow us to do great things for Him. You know, I don't know what the challenge is in your life. I don't know where it is that God's calling you. Maybe you're just facing a hard challenge right now. I want to ask you and challenge you to take the next step, whatever it is God is calling you to do, that you would respond to this. Maybe some of you just need to continue to pray. God, would you open my eyes? Maybe for some of you, you know exactly something that you're going through right now that this passage hits on. That thing that keeps you up at night, that thing that you're anxious about, that challenge or change that's coming that you know needs to happen. Would you commit today to prayer and to planning to ask that God would help you to go through that? Whatever it is today, as we close, I want to invite you to go before the Lord and ask Him how He might lead you. For some of you, you're ready to follow Jesus. You've heard the gospel, you've been thinking about it, you've been praying about it, and you know that you're ready to follow the Lord in salvation. You're ready to take that step and confess Jesus as your Savior. I want to encourage you to do that if you haven't. If you have questions about what that means, we want to talk with you. Some of you have done that and you're ready for baptism. You know, you might want to come forward at the end of this message and just ask for prayer and state that you'd like to be baptized. Maybe you just want to meet with me or Pastor David and talk about what that would mean and what that next step is, that you know you're ready to follow Jesus in baptism. Some of you are ready to join this church. We want to do great things with you. You want to join us and do great things. We want to commit to each other, to lift each other up, and to be able to do those things called together in unity as God would bring us together. And some of you, your next step really is discipleship. It's difficult for you to make these decisions. It's difficult for you to pray and to plan because you haven't grown in the Lord. You're lacking spiritual maturity, and you need the connections, and you need the intentional discipleship and teaching that only comes really in small groups. And so we want to invite you and help you find a place where you can grow, and however that would be. Of course, serving. Where's the Lord calling us? How is He breaking our heart? How is He organizing us? Whatever it is, as we close, would you seek to be not just hearers, but doers? I know I've spent a lot of time making a fairly simple point, but it doesn't negate the fact that this is incredibly important for us. All of us have decisions. All of us have changes. All of us go through times and seasons. May we remember this. May we honestly and earnestly seek prayer and planning that we may be able to act and do the things that God has called us to do.